What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, your home for the 2020 World Series champion Los Angeles Dodgers. Your home for the Dodgers, who are in the NLCS, having beaten the Giants in Game 5, 2-1 in San Francisco last night. But, of course, if you're watching this, you already knew that. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined by Matt Moreno, Daniel Starkand. Guys, Greg and I were live last night reacting. I had some takes. I had some thoughts. I had some excitement. Matt, you were in the building covering this. I'll start with you. Give me the moment, what that felt like, the reaction, the whole atmosphere. Give me your take on everything that took place in Game 5.
Yeah, it was wild. I mean, I think you could obviously feel the tension from both teams, especially as, the game was going on and it was 0-0, and it wasn't like either the Dodgers or Giants, maybe took an early lead and you could kind of sense, oh, okay, they might just, hang on to this and close
Yeah.
it out. And I think, especially within the press box from the Dodgers perspective, like the first couple innings, there was a lot of talk of, okay, Corey Knebel's obviously an opener. Is Julio going to come in the second inning, or are they going to go to another relief pitcher? I was of the belief that they would use another reliever, which obviously they ended up doing. Uh, and then once I think the game kind of ended the way it ended, obviously a lot of people were stunned inside the press box and most of Oracle Park. But there were a lot of Dodger fans last night compared to games 1 and 2, which I thought was pretty cool to see.
Okay. And Daniel, at home, not in the stadium, thankfully, given that you're 0-1 this postseason in games that you've attended. Give me your thoughts and reactions to last night.
I mean, for me, it was just a lot of nervous energy all night. Like, we knew runs were going to be at a premium. Logan Webb did his thing again. But, I started feeling good when the Dodgers scored that first run, just because I knew our pitching was lined up pretty well. Guys were throwing well.
Yeah.
The Giants hadn't barely scored all series. But then that feeling immediately goes away when Darren Ruff comes up like 2 minutes later and hits an absolute bomb. So then it's back to being nervous again. And then the Dodgers miss a couple opportunities to score in that eighth inning. Seager strikes out against Rogers. Then Trey swings at the first pitch against Duvall. I felt that was a huge missed opportunity. So I thought after that, that was the first time. After they didn't score that inning, that was when I was like, I started really considering the possibility that they might actually lose this. Yeah. But hey, credit to Cody Bellinger, of all people, coming up with the big hit. That was incredible, and the Dodgers are moving on.
Yeah. One other thing before we move on to the Braves, I'm curious to get sort of your reaction. Daniel, I'll come to you first with Dave Roberts last night. This is a guy who made a lot of big decisions, a lot of controversial decisions, and I think it was the whole gamut, right? He goes with the opener in Knebel. He brings Gratterall in the second. He goes to Julio. He pulls Julio before some people may have liked. He goes to Treinen against the bottom of the order. He doesn't double switch there to keep Gavin Lux in case Duvall does get a matchup with him. He goes to Treinen, then he goes to Jansen, then he goes to Scherzer. I think he was probably involved in the decision, Chris Taylor, to safety squeeze there in the ninth inning as well. So when you add all of those things together, Daniel, what did you think of Dave Roberts as a guy who's typically a lightning rod, but in a game where he made a lot of critical decisions and they won? Do you think he deserves a lot of credit for how that all played out? And Andrew Friedman. I'll include Andrew Friedman in there because obviously he's involved in a number of those decisions as well.
Yeah, to me, like, manager discourse is always really funny because, like, how people judge them depends on what the players do on the field. And, like, if the players go out there and perform, then Dave Roberts looks like a genius.
Yeah.
If the players don't, then he looks like a dummy. So I guess if you're one of those people that criticize Dave Roberts every time things go wrong, then you have to praise him now that things went right. Like, I definitely think he made a lot of good moves. We talked about the opener at length. I feel like I thought that worked to perfection. They did exactly what they wanted to with that. Not only do they put up a couple zeros to start the game, but they make the Giants burn a couple bench bats, which means you're getting some plus matchups later on. To me, I thought there were also some mistakes, if I'm being honest. Like, for Treinen and Jansen, they both looked awesome. I thought both of those could have, they could have went longer if you throw some double switches in there, which they didn't, which means they had to pitch Max Scherzer, which to me, I would have liked to avoid that. Like, I feel like they could have got through that game without pitching Max. Even like another option would be giving Julio one more inning. Like, he only went 4 innings, 59 pitches or whatever. I thought with the bottom of the order coming up in that seventh inning or whatever it was, he could have went one more.
Yeah.
And then, ideally you would have been able to not use Max, and then he's fresh and ready to go for game one. I still think the plan as of now is for him to pitch game one. We'll see, when Dave Roberts speaks in a few hours here. But I thought there were good things and bad things, but to me, the Dodgers came out of it on top, and that's all that matters. And I think, like Dave Roberts was saying before the game, like they opened themselves up to receive a lot of criticism for the
Yeah.
decisions they made with the opener and everything. And the fact that it worked out, like you have to praise them now.
Yeah, yeah, and Matt, I'll get your thoughts in a sec. The one thing that was interesting to me was the Trinan decision, and I've gone back and forth on that. Should they double switch? And Greg in our postgame show said, the one thing is if they double switch someone there, then chances are Gavin Lux comes out of the game and isn't going to get to face Doval, who's the guy that he had the absolute
Sure.
mash off that almost went out. So when I heard that, I was compelled by the argument for it. And the second piece was, and this is something I appreciate, and it worked out. The Dodgers were aggressive, which I liked. They didn't look at the bottom of the lineup and said, hey, can we steal 3 outs here? Whether it's from Julio extending or whether it's from going to somebody early or maybe even going to an arm like a Phil Bickford or Alex Vesia that you don't totally trust nearly as much. But what they did is they said, it doesn't matter. It's the bottom of the lineup. It's the 7th inning of a game that we absolutely need to win. Otherwise, our season ends. So put Blake Trinan out there. It's the 8th inning in a game where we absolutely need to win. So put Kenley Jansen out there and just kind of figure the rest of it out later. Now, they bet on their offense eventually coming through because beyond the 9th, who knows what the plan was at that point. Like Scherzer wasn't going to go more than 1, I can't imagine. And then you're going to Kelly and Bickford and Vesia, and things might have gotten dicey. But Matt, I appreciated the aggressiveness and the lack of complacency to say, hey, we're not taking any chances in a game like this, in a 1-run game, that anything could go wrong, that Julio could give up, make one bad pitch, and it goes sideways. We're going to bring Trinan, we're going to bring Jansen, and we'll play it by ear from there. So what did you make of those decisions and Roberts as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what both of you said. For me, even though Julio only went 4 innings, like Dave Roberts just talked about, not every inning, not every pitch is created equally. So obviously, an elimination game, he had kind of started. I don't want to say that he wasn't pitching well, or even that he got shaky, but I think you could kind of see he wasn't quite as crisp as what ended up being his final inning. And so to me, that did make sense to pull him out. The Trinan decision, that one struck me as curious as well. I guess if you look at it from the Lux component, then it certainly makes sense and a lot more understandable. I was a little surprised that Kenley, when he came in the 8th, I thought, okay, like they're going to ask him for, at least 4 or 5 outs, and then if his pitch count is up, then maybe they go to somebody else to get the final out in the 9th inning if they have the lead. Once they took the lead, I was a little surprised, excuse me, that they didn't just leave Kenley in to close it. We've seen him go 2 innings before. And like Daniel said, I was in the camp of, short of this game, of game 5, going into like 11, 12, 13 innings, like don't use Max Scherzer. You have relied on your bullpen all season. They've done well all season. They've done well against the Giants. It's not like they were hit hard throughout the series. So that's my only concern now moving forward. And I know we'll kind of get into that, but like Daniel said, Dave Roberts, it's funny. The players do well. Dave Roberts' decision making was great. If Trinan or somebody would have slipped up, if Knebel would have given up a run in the first inning, well, then it would have opened a whole can of worms over, why did they do the opener and this and that.
Yeah, and it's interesting thinking about the Jansen decision too. I'm guessing that they were hopeful that they could get 2 out of Jansen. The thing that needed to not happen was the Dodgers to put a ton of guys on base in the 8th inning and then a ton more guys on base on the 9th inning. Like those 2 things led to the situation where Kenley Jansen's spot was the very last spot to come up in the 9th. And so that was kind of the interesting dilemma there is they were almost saying, well, if we put all these guys on, then surely we score and we'll be okay. And if we don't put all these guys on, then Kenley Jansen can give us 2 innings, or maybe there's a middle ground, but it plays out like it does. So the Dodgers, go ahead.
Sorry, don't mean to interject, but I also think one thing that needed to happen is if Chris Taylor doesn't put a bunt down there, and if he hits a sac fly like he's been hitting all series, fly balls, and a second run comes in, I'd be curious to see if they're up 2 there, guy on first, 2 outs, maybe they're more, inquired to leave Jansen in there in that situation as opposed to trying to get that second run.
Yeah, that was one of my hot takes is that I actually didn't hate the decision. I thought the execution was atrocious by Chris Taylor. I think Gabe Kapler made a great decision to have the first baseman coming off. I think Taylor's the guy that I trust most to try and lay down a bunt. Again, I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying, like, I don't think it was the worst decision in the history of all decisions. I think, again, it goes to your point. It looks bad because of how bad the bunt was, I think. And that's not to say it can't be a bad decision, even if it's a good bunt, but we don't need to hash out the bunt piece of it. But that was my one weird take that Greg hated last night. I was like, I don't hate the bunt. So
I'm with Greg.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. And look, like if Chris Taylor would have struck out, then like it wouldn't have made any difference. Like Chris Taylor has struggled, and yes, he's hit some fly balls. But in a situation where they're trying everything they can to prevent the fly ball. If he hits into a double play, there's lots of ways that could have gone south. So regardless, let's move ahead to Atlanta, a team that the Dodgers are familiar with, having played them a year ago. It's not the same roster, but you're going to recognize a bunch of the names. The Dodgers and Braves have played 6 times this season. The Dodgers have won 4 out of 6. They played 3 games in Atlanta back in June. The Dodgers lost 2 out of 3. They played 3 games from August 30th to September 1st in LA. The Dodgers swept those more recently. Looking at the Braves kind of as a profile, they're 13th in weighted runs created on offense. That's been about where they're at the whole season. They haven't been a whole lot better or worse of late. They struggle against lefties. They're 25th in baseball in weighted runs created plus. Against left-handers, they're 7% below average. They're 11th against righties, right at league average. So an advantage there a little bit for the Dodgers if you've got a guy like Julio Urias that can go on the mound. Of course, the Dodgers have mostly righties in both the bullpen and in the rotation. As far as pitching-wise, the Braves are 8th in ERA, 10th in FIP. They're even 12th in baseball against lefties, 12th in baseball against righties. Their starters were 7th in ERA. That ticked up a little bit. They were 5th over in the months of September and October. Their relievers, they had the 10th best bullpen ERA, but that was 3rd in all of baseball in September and October. So their bullpen has improved a little bit. Daniel, I'll start with you. When you look at this matchup, Dodgers versus Braves on paper, what's maybe the biggest storyline or the biggest thing that jumps out to you?
I mean, I guess to me, it's like how the Dodgers come out early in the series. We saw against the Braves last year, they dropped the first 2 and 3 of the first 4, and they kind of dug a hole for themselves that they had to get out of. I don't know, like even though the Dodgers have been great in must-win games, like over the past few years, like I don't think you want to dig that hole for yourself again. So you definitely want to come out. Games 1 and 2 will be on the road, but you definitely want to try and steal one of those and come back home with a chance to win it at home without going back to Atlanta. I think Atlanta's a really good team. Like, even though they've lost a number of key players, like they still got Freddie Freeman, Ozzie Albies, like all those guys. On the pitching side, like Max Fried has been like probably the best pitcher in baseball since the All-Star break, like statistically. Charlie Morton's also been really good in the second half. So it's not going to be an easy series, but I definitely think the Dodgers have the advantage pretty much everywhere, I'd say. Like if you look at rotation, bullpen, clear advantage Dodgers. Lineup, I'd say it's probably a wash, especially considering how the Dodgers offense has mostly performed as of late. But I think if the Dodgers come out ready to go, they should be able to take care of business. They're the clear favorites in this series.
Yeah. Dodgers minus 225 to win this series. So that is a massive, massive favorite there. Matt, what do you make of the Braves-Dodgers matchup and what stands out to you?
I mean, it's got to be Jocktober, right? It's like we've been watching from afar, enjoying it, and now it's like, wait a minute, like now we need to cool this off now. Daniel, again, like he hit on all the key points. I agree, and that's what makes the Max Scherzer scenario so interesting. Is I don't know if you really can or want to bring him back now on quote unquote short rest and even shorter rest, even though it could have been his relief appearance could have been classified as his bullpen session that he did skip. But like I said, that brings Game 5 is a whole nother level of stress as opposed to going into the bullpen and just saying here's 30 pitches I'm gonna throw for the heck of it. So I think you do need to split, but also maybe take a beat and save Max Scherzer for later in the series. I'd have to see the schedule and how it kind of plays out on when he would then possibly be able to come back if it goes long. But I expect it to probably go 6 games anyway, maybe 5 if the Dodgers can steal 1 and then take care of business at home.
The scheduling makes interesting decisions for the Dodgers. They game 1 and 2 in Atlanta Saturday, Sunday, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in LA, and then Saturday, Sunday again back in Atlanta. And I think the game 1 decision for the Dodgers, Max Fried is the only starter that has been announced for any games this series. He will pitch game 1 for the Braves. The Dodgers have some decisions to make. They could basically their 2 options are a bullpen game or Max Scherzer starting. Those would be the only 2 scenarios where somebody is on normal rest. Now, if you do one of those, it's good news because then everything else sets up nicely for the Dodgers. You have Buehler on normal rest on Tuesday. You have, on Sunday. You have Urias on normal rest on Tuesday, and then Scherzer could come back on normal rest for Wednesday. You would go bullpen game on Wednesday, and then Scherzer would be back to normal rest on Thursday. Now, the flip side is if you don't start Scherzer in game 1 and you kind of try and put him back on sort of a more normal schedule, does that mean he doesn't appear until game 2, and then Urias then doesn't appear until game 4? Does that mean he doesn't appear until game 4 and Urias and Buehler on normal rest? So for me, that's why I think you have to make the decision you did in game 5 with a sense of, we're okay with this guy pitching again in game 1. That would have to be my mindset because of how it sets everything else up. We know Tony Gonsolin or David Price or bullpen game is going to happen at some point. The question is it going to be in game 1 or in game 4? If you do it in game 4, then you only have to have one bullpen game. So Daniel, for you, like, is Scherzer, like, barring something crazy happening, is Max Scherzer your game 1 starter?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's up to him, like how he's feeling, of course, and I just know he's gonna say he wants the ball. So yeah, I think Max Scherzer is gonna take the ball in game 1. You laid out kind of how it all works. Like whoever starts game 1 is gonna, in theory, start 2 games in the series. So do you want 2 bullpen games or do you want, just the 1 bullpen game in game 4? So I definitely think it'll be Max, but there's always the possibility, he like Matt said, a very stressful inning last night, and then also a lot of alcohol consumption after that. So we'll see how he's feeling today, I guess.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. Matt, I'll come to you with this next question. As I was looking at those numbers of the Braves, their performance against left-handed pitching is what kind of stood out to me. Again, 25th in baseball when it comes to weighted runs created plus against lefties. They're 7% below league average. They're league average against righties. To me, that's interesting because the Dodgers only have one left-handed reliever that they seem to trust and only one left-handed starter in their rotation. Would you shift around anything in the bullpen? Does a guy like Clevenger or a guy like Brule, does someone creep onto the roster because of the matchups and how they fare against lefties, in your opinion?
I don't know if Clevenger would get back into it just because he's been out of game action aside from rehab assignments to finish out the regular season. Rule wouldn't completely surprise me, but then also it comes down to who do you remove? And I know Corey Knebel is somebody they trust obviously against both left and right-handed hitters. Brusdar Graterol has kind of started to find his footing as well. Joe Kelly's not going to be somebody you take out of the bullpen. I don't think Phil Bickford is either. So that's where it becomes difficult. I think if anything, maybe you see somebody like a David Price, possibly play a more prominent role either as an opener for a bullpen game or just, multiple inning relief pitcher across.
Yeah, I mean, and I suppose the other
series.
option would be maybe a guy like Steven Souza loses his spot on the roster to add another relief pitcher, knowing that you've got those 3 games in a row in LA with a back-to-back on either side of it. Daniel, how would you handle the roster? Would you have the exact same roster or would you make some moves?
Yeah, that you just said exactly what I was going to say. The only way you could add another reliever is if you subtract a position player. I was going to suggest Billy McKinney. Souza actually got a couple hits in this last series. Like like you've said on past like post-game shows and stuff, like there's actually kind of a weird trust in Souza when he's at the plate for some reason that is clearly not there for Billy McKinney. I think they could live without the Billy McKinney defensive replacements. Like I think they'll be all right. So if you're going to add a reliever, I think that's what you do. Like when looking at the pitchers that were on the roster this last series, I don't see how you could take any of those guys off. Like the guys that pitched all were great, so you're not taking them off. And the guys that didn't pitch, Tony Gonsolin and David Price, are the 2 guys who could give you at least some sort of length, which in a 7-game series is kind of important, especially when you come back to LA, you're going to be playing 3 days in a row there. So you're going to need at least some guys who could give you length. Like maybe there's that one lopsided game that usually every series has that maybe you could steal a lot of outs from those guys in that game and save your other guys for other games. So I'm not expecting any changes, but if there is going to be one, I think it would be Brule for one of the position players. And if I had my choice, it'd be McKinney.
I appreciate your optimism and still believing there's a chance that Billy McKinney isn't on one of these rosters. I think the rest of us have just accepted the reality that Billy McKinney is a part of our life for the foreseeable future. We got to see him as a defensive replacement in the 9th inning of a Game 5 1-run game. It's just like everything we were hoping for as Dodger fans. So I'll make a bold prediction right here. When we talk bullpen games, I would not be surprised if David Price is actually the starter in a game like that. And I know that sounds crazy because of how the Dodgers have used him and how limited his trust is, but against a lineup that has struggled against lefties, dramatically worse against lefties than they are against righties in a big moment, we know they don't really trust Tony Gonsolin, so maybe it's the postseason experience, the left-handedness. So I'm just throwing it out there. Of course, I would be not surprised at all if somehow David Price isn't even on the roster and they went to a guy like Brule or Clevenger in place of David Price. So we'll see how that plays out. Let's get to this. We're running up against the end of our show here. So Matt and Daniel, I'll give you some time to make some predictions. Obviously, how many games, who's going to win, and then if you want to make a storyline prediction of some sort, go for it. Matt, I'll start with you. Dodgers Braves starting on Saturday night. What do you have for the series and a storyline that you think comes out of it a week from now?
I think it'll be Dodgers in 6, and the storyline will be one of the Turners.
We got asked this last night. I'll follow up. Which Turner is more important? If you could get one of them going, which would you take?
Oh man, that's tough. I don't know.
Greg and I both said Trey. For what it's worth, we were both quickly on. Give me the guy who's third, who can impact the game and with his speed and with his power and with his ability to hit for average.
I would lean that way for all those reasons because of the different ways he can impact it. Especially, a walk is almost a double. Same thing with a single. But I think we've just seen a lot of Justin Turner, how important he's meant to the lineup over October's past. And so that's kind of tough.
Okay,
so
Daniel, quickly from you, prediction for the series.
I'll say Dodgers in 5. I think they, their pitching is rolling right now. I think they could slow down that Braves offense. And I guess my storyline will be that the King, Corey Seager, will get back to his playoff dominance. He absolutely mashed against Braves pitching last year in the playoffs. He mashed against Braves pitching in the few games they played in the regular season this year. So I think he's going to be probably the series MVP. And I think you talk about which Turner needs to get going. I think Corey Seager's the guy that needs to get going.
Yeah, well, Daniel makes a prediction that Mookie Betts is going to be the offensive MVP last night. He absolutely nails it. And the very next day, he's right back here, jumping back on the Corey Seager bandwagon. You've got to respect the loyalty that this guy has. I said Dodgers in 6. That feels safe. Part of me wanted to say Dodgers in 5. I don't really have any reason to say that, but I just think that there's a part of it. And I think the offense, I'd like to say that they find a groove and just starts putting some consistent runs together. So there you go. We've all got the Dodgers. We got tons of content coming NLCS-wise. We'll have a live pregame show before Saturday's game. We'll have a live postgame show as well. So stay tuned for that. That's Matt. I'm Jeff. That's Daniel. Thanks for joining us. Subscribe to Dodger Blue 1958 on YouTube. Tell your friends, and we'll see you soon.
The best team holding a trophy high in the air. The Los Angeles Dodgers, champions of the baseball world.